have to forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know. You have to forgive yourself for the choices you made when you were a different person. We are not the same person before we meet our babies. We're not the same person going into our second pregnancies. We are constantly growing and evolving. Our knowledge base is constantly growing and evolving. And we are changing as people, we're changing as parents, we're changing as partners.
Welcome to the Birth Education Center podcast, hosted by myself, Care Messer, an entrepreneur, birth educator, and doula. My team and I want to help you discover your options in birth and postpartum, how to find your voice, and how to use that voice to navigate our maternal healthcare system. You and your baby are not just a number. This information includes doulas too. Now let's get started. Today we are talking about VBAC success, and this is going to be the first in three because when we tried to combine it into one outline, there's no fucking way. There's just too much to talk about, and we want it to be as detailed and as thorough as possible, with also opening up more conversation with you guys for what you want to hear more from us about this with. So 1 in 3 births in America are cesareans. Is that because our bodies are broken? No. Is it because our system is broken? 100%. But I also want to say our system isn't broken. It was structured that way. And the goal is to always prevent unnecessary cesareans if we can, which is why we have a free mini class called How to Prevent an Unnecessary Cesarean that I encourage you to watch if you have not had a cesarean, or if you have somebody that's pregnant. I think that basis is a really good place to start for figuring out what you want your birth to look like and what options you have. With every cesarean birth you have, the complications increase and your risk of death increases and your risk of baby having issues occur. And the more information you have ahead of time to prevent that cesarean, the better. Ashley had a cesarean with her triplets, as you know, and she was a leader of ICAN for 3 years, and she's been a member of ICAN for, 10 years, maybe more. And I thought today we would just start by asking her some questions on VBAC success, how to encourage that, and also how to prevent maybe your first cesarean from ever happening. So Ashley, can you tell us a little bit about what ICAN stands for and what it is?
Yeah, I mean, ICAN was a really pivotal part of my doula journey, but as well as my healing journey from my unexpected cesarean birth. The ICAN title stands for International Cesarean Awareness Network. And it is international. There's about 120 chapters all over the world, most of them being in North America. And they're usually centered around like a larger city. So you'll have sort of a larger metro area that you'll have serving families in that area. And ICAN was formed as a response to the rapidly increasing number of cesareans happening. And it set off alarm bells. But this is happening a lot more frequently. And we have people who are looking for support having unexpected cesareans or realizing that they have this higher chance of having a cesarean, and they're looking for resources on how to reduce their risk or prevent it. And then, of course, with all of these cesareans, now we have a whole wave of people looking for information on, do I need to have another cesarean? What is a VBAC? How do I have a VBAC? And that's really what the foundation is of ICAN, which is providing information and support for people. And one of our primary goals as a organization, when I was a leader, that I learned is preventing that primary cesarean as often as it is safe to do so. It's really important that we understand that cesareans are major surgery. As much as we, especially in this country, I feel like sort of minimize what people go through when they have cesareans and oversimplify it. And it's not just like society at large, but I feel like also providers make it sound simpler than it is often by just come in and we'll do this, we'll do that. It takes an hour and you'll have a baby, and not really getting into how difficult the recovery can be, how much higher the risks are, especially for the person having the baby. And we sort of minimize it because it's not this long drawn out process that labor can be, that especially scheduled cesareans, I feel like, are treated like getting your tonsils out. And it's so much more in depth than that. It's one of the only surgeries that we have where we are most often awake for it. And we go through so many layers of the body to get to the baby that it involves so much of our body recovering in the cesarean process. So it is a much more in-depth much higher risk thing than a lot of people think it is. And the thing that makes the ICAN support so unique is that it is peer to peer support. So it's literally parents helping parents. And it can be parents that have had cesareans as well as parents who don't want cesareans or parents who are many years removed from having their cesareans, parents who've had VBAC success, all helping each other. And the leaders are also peers. So we're all in that same group, and doulas are welcome to be a part of it, but providers are not a part of ICAN. It is simply people talking about their experiences with having cesareans, recovering from cesareans, and having VBACs. And that's really, I think, a very special, unique type of support and information network that helps people gain the ability to do research, to advocate for themselves, and to ask questions about their risk of having a cesarean, their recovery from a cesarean, and kind of all the things that go with it. But as well as reducing that primary cesarean and raising awareness about cesareans, another huge cornerstone of ICAN is raising VBAC awareness and trying to increase VBAC rates and VBAC accessibility all over the world. And I think that's a really noble goal. And even ACOG agrees with that. ACOG being the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology agree that healthy people should be offered a VBAC after they have had a cesarean because a VBAC is safer than a repeat cesarean. VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean, is often presented or framed as this sort of fringe idea that why would you do that and somehow very dangerous. And actually, all of the data, all of the professionals who get together and talk about, obstetric data and gynecological data and obstetric outcomes say that a VBAC is actually the safest option for most people after they've had a cesarean. And the reason for that is because cesareans get more dangerous, as Kara alluded to in the beginning. Cesareans get more dangerous the more you have. Each successive cesarean is more dangerous than the previous one. Each VBAC is less dangerous than the previous one. And that's true for vaginal births in general. Each vaginal birth is generally safer than the one that preceded it. And cesareans get more complicated, more dangerous, longer, to the point where they try to actually recommend limits on how many cesareans someone should have in their lifetime. There's no limit on how many VBACs someone can have in their lifetime. So we're here to talk about how do you set yourself up for going for a VBAC, achieving your VBAC, and having the birth that you want when the birth you had the first time maybe was not what you were looking for, or even if you planned it, the outcome was harder than you thought it would be, or more difficult than you thought it would be, that you can have that confidence and that understanding that a VBAC is a viable, safe, great option for most people.
Well, cesareans sometimes represent feelings of trauma or feelings of failure. They didn't do enough, they weren't enough, whatever. And we're not perpetuating, and I don't want this episode to make anyone feel like one birth is better than another, like a vaginal birth is always better than a cesarean, because that's not our intention. The intention is to save lives and to keep birth more connected. And that's the whole point of this. So, Ashley, if somebody wants a VBAC, but it feels unattainable because of, I don't know, circumstance with provider or family support or whatever, what's their best option for moving forward with their education and getting a successful VBAC?
Yeah. So I always say the best way to start looking ahead at having a VBAC is looking back at what happened last time and realizing where we need to switch things up or change things around. Often it can be looking at where you felt like perhaps you lost control, looking at what feelings you have around where you gave birth, who you gave birth with, what kind of medical support you had, and can we change things up this time around, right? We can't hope for different outcomes if we're setting ourselves up for the same scenario, right? So, this old saying is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different outcome.
100%. But we do it all the time, all the time.
It's something that Kara and I talk about and that birth workers help families face all the time is that My first birth didn't go how I hoped, but I'm not going to change providers. I'm not going to change venues. I'm not going to do anything different this time around, but fingers crossed that it's different this time around. We have to be willing to look at our responsibilities as well as looking at the circumstances and looking at what tweaks and changes can I make, right? There are a lot of reasons why we have cesareans that are completely out of our control. It can be a baby that's not in a great position, those stinking breech babies that you're like, what the heck, kid? I feel like I did everything right. And here your feet are trying to come out first, right? Or it can be that we have health issues come up that are totally unexpected or come on really severe that there is no alternative. We have to get this baby out and get this pregnancy over with so that our body can heal. Yes, those things are very much out of our control, but those are not the reasons why most people have unexpected cesareans. One of the biggest things that people face is what's commonly known as the cascade of interventions, which is choosing a hospital birth, signing up for one thing that leads to another thing that leads to another thing that leads to another thing, and ultimately find ourselves on the operating table. And we're like, how did I get here? Many families describe going through the hospital system, especially after an unexpected cesarean, as feeling railroaded, as feeling blindsided. These are very common descriptions that people use when they talk about their hospital births, especially when they ended up having a cesarean. So, a big part of it is that lack of knowledge that many of us have going into, especially that first birth, that lack of education, that lack of support, and that sort of blind trust that many of us have, where we choose not to take classes or get educated, we choose not to hire a doula, and we show up at the hospital sort of expecting they're going to do everything to have the birth that we want, and then we have everything we didn't want to have. Or we didn't even know what we wanted. And all of a sudden, we have all these things happening to us that we don't know what they are, what they're for. Is this supposed to be happening? Is it necessary? And that's what leads us to that sort of railroaded, blindsided feeling.
I think too, we've been told in every doctor's appointment, "We got you. You don't need a birth plan. We're gonna take really good care of you. Our nurses are fantastic," whatever that is. And because we're avoidant with anything uncomfortable, just that's by our human nature, we go, "Okay, I'm in good hands. Everything's fine." And we dismiss all of our responsibility for figuring out that we have to take some kind of autonomy and control of our birth education and our understanding of what actually works, like with our bodies and also with the system and how we're gonna work with that, because we just keep listening to, "You're gonna be fine. Everything's okay," and we want to hear that. As a pregnant person, we do wanna hear that, right? "Everything's okay, baby, everything's okay. Oh, baby might be too big. Okay, they're still gonna take care of it. Oh, what if my baby gets stuck? Oh, they're still gonna take care of it." We just release all responsibility for even finding anything out because we're avoidant of uncomfortable everything, conversations, information, having to make choices, whatever. And that can lead to that cascade of interventions just because we're ignorant to the process or we're scared of the process.
And here's the other thing, too, right? Is that there's also this fear of looking back and examining where was I responsible for what happened? Because we're afraid to feel shame. And I'm going to tell you right now, especially if you went into your first birth without any sort of education, you cannot fault yourself for not knowing what you didn't know at the time, right? You don't know things until you learn them. And some of us don't have opportunities to get educated. Some of us are really on our own when we go into having our babies and we don't realize that we can find these supports that are out there. But we have to be willing to take some responsibility in the choices that we made and say, I can change some things. I can do some things differently this time. And then also holding providers accountable, looking back and saying, this felt dishonest what this provider said to me. This was promised to me and then this was not followed through, or this provider outright lied to me, right? Being willing to say, I trusted these people and they did not follow through in the way that I hoped they would. And maybe I need different people to support me in my birth this time. And getting away from what Karen and I always talk about, our vaginal loyalty we have because we are afraid of those uncomfortable conversations. We're afraid of breakups, right? We're afraid it's going to be awkward if we go look for a different doctor or maybe look for a midwife and do it at home or at a birth center or something like that, that somehow we're going to be guilty of betraying this provider. And we'll definitely dig into the provider side of it a lot more in a future episode. But it's really important to find that balance of where was I responsible and where can I make change, as well as recognizing that, especially in the system, there is a lot that is out of our control when we don't have that education or knowledge to advocate for ourselves or be autonomous and find that voice. And so then we really can become a victim of the system. And we can take back some control over that by getting educated. And when you have education, you have options, which I don't know, Carrot. We've probably said that 50,000 times since we started this podcast,
More like 100,000 times.
but it forever and ever will be what we tell people, because if you don't know your options, you don't have any.
There's so many bits to that too, because I know the fear of getting educated, because then we feel like we have to take action, and we're scared to take action because what if our choice is wrong and it leads to what we don't want? I want to put this back out there to you. Whether you choose the choice and it leads to where you didn't want, or a provider makes that choice and it leads to where you didn't want, you're the one that has to deal with those consequences. Either way, it doesn't make it any less painful to be blaming it on somebody else. You're still sitting with it. So understanding that the options are, oh, I have an informed choice to make here. I'm going to feel confident in making this because I've gotten the information I need. I've asked the questions I wanted, and now I'm going to make this choice. Or they totally made it for me because I gave up all my autonomy. Either way, you're going to end up in the same place, right? If that's not where you wanted to be. So understanding how education can open those options up for you is key, not only to preventing the cesarean, but preventing a second one. So one of the number one things about getting education is learning how your body works. How does it start labor? Because it always will start labor. You will never, ever not start labor. And that may have been one of the reasons that you went in for the induction last time, right? My body just wasn't starting anything. And so it was time. Really, was it time? I don't know. Nature will always start your labor because you're sending off these chemical hormones and stuff and exchanges with your baby to get things moving in your body. It may not have been the right time because your baby wasn't ready. Your body will always start labor. So, understanding how your body works is what's going to allow you to trust your body. And think about all the times in your life that you may have been betrayed by your body. You had painful periods, it didn't work. I don't know, you could have a back injury and now you can't function the way you wanted to in gymnastics, whatever. There's always this different layers for your specific scenario on, do you trust your body at the end of the day? I want to pose to you one really key thing about being pregnant is you've grown this baby the whole time. Your baby has been growing the whole time. They didn't betray you by not growing eyelids on one side. Like, that would be weird. It doesn't happen that way, right? Your body has supported this pregnancy, and now you've got this baby that's ready to come out. Trust your body, trust the timing. All of that makes a difference. And it can make a difference for your first birth. It can make a difference for your second birth. You're going to learn that in education. And then the next thing is, what is in store for you at the hospital? How does this birthing system work? Do you understand that your hospital is run by a corporation? Do you understand that it's a for-profit business? Do you understand that providers have a whole list of guidelines they have to do because they work for the man? It is not the system you think where it's like the dream we're sold, that we just go in and everything works according to how we individually are and what our needs are. It is not case specific unless you have a provider that is very conscious of that. It is big business. It is corporate money. It is, how do we get those people in and out of these beds as fast as possible? Because this is the most expensive hotel you will ever stay in your life, unless you happen to go to Dubai on the regular. This is a corporation where we're making money. So what are those policies? What are those procedures that are commonly, if not 100% of the time, recommended? Because that's what feeds that beast of money. That's what you need to understand with the system. I'm not demonizing the system. I'm just being real with the system. If you understand how those things work, you're going to be able to make different choices for you as the individual, because this is your birth. It's your healing. It's your birth experience with your baby. It's your baby's healing in some cases.
Yeah, and it's not just about money, right? It's also about liability. And they feel like at the end of the day, if they cut the baby out and you're both alive, that they did their job and they can't be sued because everybody is alive at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
But they have studied over and over again just how traumatized people are by their experiences, even when both people came out of it okay, even though both people were healthy and both people were alive. Because alive is the floor, right? That's the base of what we should be going for. But there's so much more to a safe and healthy and respected birth experience than both of you ending up alive. But because the majority of hospitals in this country are for profit organizations that are providing a paid service, liability is at the top of everybody's mind. And that getting sued, that potential loss of income, that potential mark on their names, the potential loss of reputation is always hovering over these especially big hospital models because that's the thing that they are more afraid of than anything is getting sued or being liable for poor outcomes. But they literally view death as the only potential poor outcome when it comes to maternity care. And they don't recognize that the other things that they're doing are causing trauma. They're causing debilitating lifelong physical issues. They're causing developmental and sensory issues for developing kids that are born into these situations. That cutting a baby out and getting them both out alive should not be the goal. That is not achieving a positive outcome. But that is literally the guiding light for so many of these organizations is how do we not get sued? That's probably more than anything the pressure that is on so many of these hospital systems, which then leads to them having these very narrow procedures that we try to fit everybody into these extremely narrow, perfectly laid out boxes of how a labor should go, how long it should be, how long we should wait, and what is acceptable in terms of patience and risk and trying things and allowing the patient to have that autonomy and that say in their experience, and what is pushing us out of our policies and procedures to a point where we now feel like we are at risk as a company or as an organization, right? And so we are completely so far away from that patient centered ideal that Care was mentioning, that feeling like we're going to go in and be taken care of as an individual. That is not how birth is handled in the hospital systems, especially in North America. We can't really speak to other places in the world, but in the West, that's the hospital model. That is what people are birthing in, especially in the United States.
And I think what makes me feel bad, and it's tender to my heart, is that that's maternity care. If we were in ortho and we were getting our bones operated on, there's so much more attention to our feelings and how the procedure's going and how our healing's going because there's not as much of a risk of being sued. I think those providers can breathe a little bit easier and say, "Hey, how was your experience? And here's what we're going to do." And it's so much more laid out. And I've watched that with my daughter over and over with her different surgeries, comparing it to the maternal healthcare system because it is everyone's alive, we're good. And that continuity of care and really deep communication and connection with humanity is just missing there. And if you understand that, you can go in with a little more preparedness. When you understand through education what labor is and you're not scared of it, you can allow your body to do that process. We are terrified of pain. We are terrified of the what ifs. We don't even look into labor can actually be pretty comfortable if we have the right tools and our baby might be in a good position and we have the right support. We don't even look at that because we've been watching TV since we were 2. That has been our birth education on how scary birth is, how terrifying labor is, how bad contractions hurt. And if we are tense and we are fearful, they hurt 15 times more because we don't know enough about our bodies and we haven't worked through the fear layers of this is a temporary, uncomfortable, and maybe painful situation that we're going to be walking through as the end result to get this baby. And if labor does go on for too long and baby is in a funky position or whatever, we will have the education and the tools after we've exhausted all our regular labor tools to get in there, get our epidural, maybe even have a cesarean, but also manage what that birth can look like for ourselves and our babies. It makes a huge difference on how we view our birth experience and maybe prevent that birth trauma that Ashley was talking about.
Yeah. And a big part of getting educated and that looking back that I was talking about, that fear of taking responsibility and what that means to look back at our first experience, is that bringing up feelings of failure from our first experience and feelings of fear about what this next experience is going to be like. Fear can be everything from repeating the past, right? That what if it turns out exactly the same and I don't want that? I don't want another cesarean. I don't want another induction. What if, even though I'm making all of these choices and getting educated, it's out of my control? What if I can't change providers? What if everything goes exactly the same and I'm right back where I started? As well as the fear and misunderstanding about VBAC and that sort of cultural misunderstanding of like the fact that VBACs are safe and that the potential risks of VBAC are very, very, very small, smaller than nearly all the other risks that we face in maternity care, that we have fears about our VBAC going wrong, right? And it's not just a fear of things happening the way they did before, but these unknown things related to going for a VBAC. And also, hey, I've never had a vaginal birth before. What if that part of it that I don't understand is also very scary, right? So we want to always, when we talk about birth education, encourage you to face those fears head on. And as difficult as that is, and as much as that goes against our Western sensibilities, where we sort of want to stick our head in the sand and say, la, 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 it's not going to happen to me, or I don't want to talk about it because it makes me uncomfortable, we have to. We have to face our fears in order to have a different experience. Fear can be a major hurdle to overcome in any birth, but especially in the pursuit of a VBAC. Fear can be the wall between us and the birth that we would hope to have in our dreams. It can be the fear that holds us back from that experience.
So, when we talk about releasing fear, I want to start by naming it. There's so many layers to us bearing what we're actually scared of or even facing that there's an actual underlying issue. And it may be I hated my doctor. She was horrible or whatever. But what was the feeling behind that? Name the fear. I felt like I had no say. I felt like I had no voice. I felt like no matter what I said, I was dismissed or I was looked down on. Does that also correlate to something that's happened in your life over and over? Have you always felt that way with authority? Did it make it even bigger because now you were in a super vulnerable position and that provider or nurse or whoever, could even be your partner, was saying, relax, you're fine. Don't worry about it. We've got you. And you felt completely nameless and voiceless? Like, really look back at sometimes those are repeating patterns. And then in your most vulnerable spot, it hit you again, which is 10 times worse. It's a bigger trauma than it would have been. Did you feel like you didn't have enough information to make decisions? Did you even know what to ask? Was that from lack of education or was it because you were so overwhelmed because the speed of the hospital was just too much for you at that point? What are the fears associated with that? Either lack of information or the speed in which things were happening, because that's a thing. Another thing that's not talked about, but it's a thing, is what did your partner do that pissed you off or didn't do that pissed you off? Because we don't want to blame a partner, but was the partner in your eyes not doing enough or doing too much or moving things in a certain way? Have you had those conversations? There's also a flip side to that that's kind of a side note. What did your partner feel during that whole cesarean experience? Because nobody talks to the partner. You come home and it's all, let's get you recovered. Let's make sure baby's okay. No one says, did you experience something uncomfortable during that whole situation? How did you feel? Did you feel out of control? Did you feel like you had no voice? Did you feel like you couldn't save or protect this situation? Partners are left with that probably for the whole time they're waiting for this next baby. And it's going through their mind. And they're like, well, I want to be supportive, but oh my gosh, we could have skipped that whole thing and just done a half an hour surgery and that baby would have been out. Keep that in mind as you're preparing for a VBAC and really talk to your partner about what they experienced because it's really neglected.
I think too, what we don't recognize is especially in a partnership like that is if our partner is carrying around feelings of neglect or fear or trauma that we're feeling that, right? And especially when we make that choice to get pregnant again, to go on this journey again, and especially with male partners, which in so much of society, in this sort of patriarchal society that we live in, are not encouraged to talk about their feelings or to have feelings, period. That sometimes we think, well, they don't talk about it. So therefore, it doesn't affect me or affect anything. It radiates off of you, right? When everything we feel from our partner is trepidation and we can see the fear on their face, we can see like beads of sweat form when we start to talk about potentially laboring again, like that affects us. We carry those fears from the people around us who witnessed our births or supported us through our birth. And so it's really important to talk about it, process it, work through it together before you go on this journey of meeting another baby because it will impact you and how you labor. And if you're like, I'm releasing all these fears, but you're carrying around fears that don't belong to you because you and your partner aren't talking about what their fears are, what their traumas are, what was hard for them about that experience. When Kara and I were talking about this a couple days ago, we were talking about how it's like witnessing someone you love in a car accident and they end up okay afterwards. And so you're grateful that they're alive, but you still witnessed the accident, right? So being a witness and a support in a traumatic birth can impact them on a cellular level as well. And then that trickles out to us. So, processing fears is not just for you as the person having the baby, but also for the people who supported you in that first birth experience and who are going to be supporting you in this next birth experience. That everybody's fears are addressed so that we're not having the weight of other people's fears and concerns on us, because that's a lot harder to shed, especially if we're not addressing it.
Absolutely agree. And I think one of the biggest hangover fears that just hovers is what if I have to have another cesarean? Sometimes you schedule it. You're like, okay, I'm good. Let's just have another birth like that. I'm fine with it. It's the beast I know, or I chose it in the first place. I'm good, right? But then if you really want a vaginal birth after cesarean and that's what you want your trajectory to be like, you still have to address if baby is not tolerating or if a health concern comes up or whatever that is, what if you have another cesarean? Are you prepared for that? And what do you want to go differently on this one? Because that's where education and support can really make the difference with that. So talking to a birth worker, an expert in birth trauma, releasing fears, walking through your birth story, stuff like that. And then please add a therapist. I have so many families come back the second time who have done therapy and worked through it over and over and all the case scenarios. And these therapists have done that for hundreds of times before you, right? They see things differently than you and they can really help you process that. And sometimes after that therapy, you're choosing another cesarean. And sometimes you're like, hell no, I am ready for this VBAC and I'm going to find the right support and the right provider. And I've got the education I need and I'm going forward with it. But that extra layer of help with a therapist makes all the difference in helping you release fears. Hypnotherapy can help. Talking it out with your family and friends that are close to you that are supportive of it can really help. When they're not supportive, those are the people I wouldn't even be talking to because you're not going to convince them that your way is the best way. And it's only going to fill you with more fearful stories and more doubt in yourself and your body's ability to birth. Please get the help you need, whether that be birth worker and therapist support or just therapist support. But naming your fears is number one, and it's super key to having that successful VBAC. If you don't address it before you're pregnant or before that next birth, it's going to freaking come up in labor and you're going to be super ticked that you didn't do the work. The other bit with fear release is I need you to find compassion and grace for yourself. You went through an experience that you didn't like, or had parts of it that you didn't like, or maybe just one sticking point. If I were a friend who came to you with that experience, how would you listen? How would you support me? And what advice would you give me? You would be so much kinder to me than you are to yourself because the voice in your head for yourself is way more unkind than what you would offer to a friend. Please talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend and really lay it out in love and compassion, because that's what's going to help you get rid of it, and not like dismiss it and have it be done, but able to look at it and not be so activated by it and go, okay, this is what happened. Here's my part in it. Here's maybe not my part in it because it was baby that was breech and I didn't really have a part in that. I did all the things. Here's what I need to do for this time. And here's the kind of support I need to gather. That's the advice you would give to a friend. Please be that kind to yourself. It's going to make a huge difference in how you recover and how you move forward with this next baby's birth.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about trust and support and that belief, it starts with how we treat ourselves and how we feel about ourselves going into it. If we don't believe in ourselves, no one else is going to believe in us. If we don't love ourselves, no one else is going to love us, right? And so it goes back to what I said earlier when I said you have to forgive yourself for not knowing what you didn't know. You have to forgive yourself for the choices you made when you were a different person. We are not the same person before we meet our babies. We're not the same person going into our second pregnancies. We are constantly growing and evolving. Our knowledge base is constantly growing and evolving. And we are changing as people. We're changing as parents. We're changing as partners. And so we're so good at looking back at ourselves and judging our past selves and being embarrassed by our past selves and being hard on our past selves. But that version of ourselves was less than the person we are now. And we have so much more to bring into this journey and to support ourselves through a VBAC. And it really does start with us. And we're going to dig more into support and building that support network around yourself in a future episode. But know that it has to start with you loving yourself, giving yourself that grace, and trusting yourself to go on this next journey. It starts with you. And so be a friend to yourself and love yourself going into this next journey.
I think you wrapped it up just fine. We will see everybody next week.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. And remember, it's your body, your choice, and finding your voice is your power. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us in all the places, and go to birtheducationcenter.com for our blog and more online education classes. And we'll see you next week.